There we go. All right. So, yes, thank you, Becky. Thank you for the introduction and that lovely recognition statement at the beginning. I'm Miranda, Executive Director for Arts Ed Washington. And before this role, I was an educator. I taught English language arts and dance and different interdisciplinary art forms in different programs around primarily Eastern Washington. Then I also spent 7 years supervising student teachers as they finished up their practicum and went into their student teaching internships at Eastern Washington University. So I've been really fortunate to get to see a lot of these arts options and also arts issues in practice in a lot of different schools around the state. So, and even a little outside of the state. But I'm really excited to get to talk to you or talk with you about these things. We have a lot of really detail-oriented information today. So we will be pausing every once in a while to ask for your thoughts, to gather some information from you. And then if you do have any really burning questions that you want to make sure we get to, you're welcome to put that in the chat. And then we'll see where we can like weave it in to the flow of our presentation. And at the end, we've also designated some time where we can just hopefully chat back and forth around the room, so to speak, if we haven't already covered whatever you wanted to know about. So that's me, and that's a little bit about the presentation. And let me quickly pass it over for an introduction from the man of the hour, and I think maybe, I don't know if Josh is here, but maybe the only other man in this session even. Oh, there's Josh. Hello, Josh. Sorry, hadn't seen you there. So one of the fantastic folks in this room, but James Andrews, one of the people responsible for this new law and some of the requirements that we're going to be talking about today. James, want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm James Andrews, art teacher at North Kitsap High School. I've been in Washington teaching in North Kitsap School District for about 25 years now. The last 20 of those were spent getting to this point of actually having this law. So it was about 20, 22 years ago when I first kind of put something out there, talked with Anne Renee Joseph, who was the arts program supervisor for the arts at OSPI, and just kind of started working towards like, hey, what are we doing? What's going on with the arts here? And really kind of being very demanding about it. And she put it right back on me and put me right in my place where I belong. And said, what are you doing about it? So and
Oh, that's
and
great,
we
though.
looking together. She sent me some stuff, and from there I just started, not knowing any better. Sometimes not knowing what you're doing is great because you just don't know what you can't do. So I just wrote a law and started shopping it around. So we had a
I
new
just wrote a law.
state representative. So the second she came on board, I invited her out to coffee and started talking about the arts, and she eventually became state senator and kept at her, bugging her year after year, session after session.
Wow.
And so we eventually got some House resolutions passed and kept working towards the point where we could actually get this law out there. We put it out as an initiative first, and then COVID hit, and signature gathering was just too big of a climb. So Senator Rolfes and Senator Wellman from Mercer Island agreed to put this on the floor at the next session, and I didn't even know it. All of a sudden, I looked on one day, and it was there.
I didn't know that. Wow, that's exciting.
I got my legislative update, and it was like, oh, on the floor this morning. I was like, oh, for art education. I was like, oh, what's that? Yeah. And I was like, oh, and it was the exact initiative. It was, I think, a couple of words. It. And it passed by almost unanimous on both chambers. So with a couple of little amendments here and there, which we'll probably get to.
Yep. Yeah, that's fantastic. And actually, that's a really neat example of how we can get started on some of these things and just not give up. And yeah, we'll get to those details. So Before we dive into the content, I wanted to go ahead and talk us through a few community guidelines, just to be sure that we kind of set the expectations for everybody. We're really glad that everyone's here, and chances are everyone who's here has a foundational understanding of this law and or of public schools and or of arts in the schools, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we all have the exact same foundational knowledge or the exact same background to work from. So I still want to be sensitive to those differences. So of course, you're welcome to stay on or off camera as fits your needs, especially knowing this is being recorded. I will make sure that I get our slide deck up on our ArtsEd website, and Becky, you're also, or Shannon, you're also welcome to like send this out to people if you'd want after. Let's see. We are diving today, number 2, we're diving into some fairly audience specific content, but there might still be more, depending on your own situation, that we would need to follow up with you on afterwards. If it's too specific to your particular school or your particular circumstance, it might detract from the overall benefit of the group today. So just kind of monitoring that as we move in and out of different subtopics here. Number 3, like we already mentioned, we're going to have several different ways for you to engage. We're excited for that. Never required, but the more that you can inform our conversations, of course, the more effective our conversations will be. Plus, ever so slightly selfishly, the more data I gather from you, the more I can possibly use that to apply for grants for ArtsEd Washington, which will enable us to continue doing things like this to support you. So anything you can give us helps. Then number 4, this is obviously a complex topic. Public education is more social political than I think some people realize. And that means we sometimes encounter polarizing conversations within it, and that's okay. Respectful disagreement is encouraged, but of course, with an emphasis on the respectful part. We want to keep everyone feeling involved and everyone feeling at least somewhat comfortable. Little outside the comfort zone, but not completely unwelcome, of course. And then just a lovely little disclaimer, we're doing the best we can to walk you through some of these state laws and regulations, but if you have real specific questions about the legality, talk with your union, talk with your school leaders, talk with a lawyer, an accountant, whoever would be a more official advisor in those situations. Partner with other people that are content specific experts on that. And we will do our best to guide you in the meantime. Becky already mentioned clock hours are available for WAEA members. And I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, WAEA, for having us here. You all are such strong advocates as an organization, and I'm really enjoying the chance to work with you. All right. Becky also did a really lovely acknowledgement at the beginning. I'll still add hours because it's important. But we do want to recognize that as ArtsEd Washington, we serve the whole of the state. I'm coming to you from Spokane. James is coming from North Kitsap. We probably have people from sprinkled all throughout. And no matter where we are in this state, we acknowledge that we live, work, learn on the traditional homelands of many Indigenous peoples, and we recognize there are complex histories and cultures of the people that have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Our acknowledgement is not trying to take the place of authentic relationships with these Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land that we occupy. And of course, the Indigenous people who are still inhabiting these regions today. I always like to add some resources if you want to investigate further. So down at the bottom, you'll be able to click the link to take you to the Tribes of Washington, or OSPI has an actual Office of Native Education with a very robust program, set of programs facilitating education for our state tribal compact schools, and for other people that want to more effectively support Native education within their schooling. So that's what we have there. And then I thought it would also be a fitting segue into this map. So this winter, We sent out surveys. There were 122 people that responded. Want to say, of course, thank you for those of you that responded, and to the leaders who helped us collaborate. I want to take a few moments here to give you some insights, some real brief introductory insights from the survey. Now, if you attended our last session in, gosh, was it February now? Wow, that feels like a lifetime ago. We did cover some of the survey responses, like the fact that our self-reported understanding of the funding system in Washington State, not very strong, and that's understandable. That's really a difficult topic and ever changing. But I want to talk a little bit more about the people that we learned about in today's reflection. If you need to learn about anything that we covered in the previous session, you can access that on our YouTube channel and on our website. But so here are some insights that we've gained from the survey that I did not share last time. You see the map with all of our answers, where they came from. Of course, we have a mountain range in the middle and probably some desert and farm areas, but largely our population is still pretty much concentrated in the northwest part of the state. So if you are coming to us today from maybe up northeast, maybe down south, maybe over in the peninsula, and you would like to get more involved or share more with people in your region, honestly, I'm sure WAEA would like that. I know Arts Ed Washington would love it, because we can't represent you if we don't know who you are and what's going on in your region. So please connect with us. We'd love that. Some other things we learned. So first of all, I want to emphasize this. You're going to hear me say this in so many different ways today. Your voice matters. I know for myself, at least coming from being a teacher, there were times where it felt like, well, nobody's really listening to me. I'm just a teacher. I mean, my kids listen to me, hopefully, but outside of my classroom, I'm not a professional. I'm not a leader. I'm not rich. I'm not a politician. I don't have things that make people want to listen to me. But you know what? You do matter. You are the content expert. You are the student expert. You are the expert of what's going on in your school and your community. Your voice matters. And with that, there are so many different experiences in our different schools that if we only hear the voices from a certain subset, then I really think our society as a whole gets a misunderstanding of what is going on in schools these days, because some of the other voices were silent or just not as squeaky, maybe. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So here's an example from our survey. About 33, oh, there's Gail again. About 33% of our respondents of the 122 were from 3 or 4A schools. So I did some digging. In Washington, 3 4A schools constitute about 5% of the schools total, about 15% of Washington students. I averaged, but still. So first of all, that's very small. So already in our survey, our responses were a little bit disproportionately heavy from the 3A4 schools compared to the representation of the state as a whole, right? That might mean that our 1A, 2A, or our B schools, and chances are probably even elementaries, are a little bit underrepresented in our survey, but then take that out into the general public and imagine how much we need to hear your voice if you're coming from one of these other schools. On top of that, I want to point out success rates really differ by region, even within sticking with the 3, 4A schools as an example. In a lot of our more rural areas or our schools where there's a really high population of students for whom English is a later language that they're learning, the graduation rates, the test rates are significantly lower, even though they're still 3, 4A. So you think, oh, they still have, the same opportunity for like the funding and the big teachers and pulling from lots of teaching candidates, but maybe not, because those success rates are showing otherwise. So even if you are a 3, 4A school, but if you're in one of these regions that maybe has other demographic issues at play, we need to hear from you, because we can't just say, oh, well, for example, I'm coming from Spokane again. Here's what's working in Spokane public schools with their 3 and 4A schools. Not going to be the same as what's working in Moses Lake or at Eisenhower or something, right? Okay, so there's one thing. Also, something that I think a lot of people forget, we also have public charter schools in Washington and tribal compact schools that might not be represented at all if those folks aren't speaking up. So especially they are under the umbrella of public schools in Washington, and I want to make sure that we're remembering them in those conversations too. Okay, a couple other insights here. Along the lines of Your Voice Matters, I thought this was interesting. Over 75% of our respondents said that they accessed our survey because of organizations like WAEA, WMEA, etc., because of their colleagues or their friends. So that reminds me, you are the ones that have the best chance of getting the word out. I can be posting things all day long on ArtsEd Washington social media or website or sending out newsletters or emails, but really it's those personal connections that matter. So 75% of the people didn't get it directly from our work at ArtsEd Washington. Although a few people, I laughed, did write in that the friend they got it from was Miranda. And I thought, oh, even there. They're counting that as a friend contact, not as an organization. So utilize your friendships. Those also matter. And then last one that was, I thought, almost a little bit sad, gonna admit, we really need to encourage our new teachers to get involved. Would you look at this? 50% of the people that responded to our survey have been teaching 15 years or more. Only 3.3%, 4 total teachers, have been teaching under a year. And it's no wonder. I mean, we've all been there. It's being a new teacher, it's hard, especially in this day and age. So they have a lot on their plate. But I also feel like all the more reason for us to be encouraging them. We shouldn't expect them to just know that these things exist. They need the people who have the experience and maybe a little bit more time in their professional bandwidth to reach out to them and say, hey, there's this survey, Your Voice Matters. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, there's this session. Will you go with me? Or at least meet with me afterwards and talk about what we learned. So encourage your new teachers. And just following up on that, also, only another 13% were in their first 5 years. So it's not just a year number 1. It's really, we need to encourage our new teachers because we're missing some pretty significant voices there. Okay, so with that, I want to pause and ask who are our participants today. So Becky's going to launch a couple of polls so that we can find out where you're from and what is the professional background that you are bringing to this.
So I think I launched it, correct? Yes, I can.
Yep, we see it.
All right, all right.
I don't know if it shows on the recording, but yes. So we're asking which audience best describes your role. And if you're a teacher, how long have you been a teacher? And yeah, so far our poll is kind of following that trend. Most of us here are 15 years or longer, and a couple are 5 to 15 years, and then no one 5 years or less, at least not yet.
Guess I can't answer, but I am an arts instructor as well. So, gosh, 15 plus years. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels strange to say those things.
Yeah. So I'm going to end this poll and I'm going to start a second poll real quick.
Fantastic.
Oh, the results. Look at me go. So you can see who's in the room, community member,
awesome. Love that.
everyone. And oh, here we go. Then we go to this one. So this one is more on geographic questions. So in what county is your primary residence? What zip code do you consider your primary residence? What zip code best reflects your primary school placement if you have a primary school placement? Not primary school.
Right. Your
So,
primary placement.
like, I teach high school.
a
In
lot of arts teachers, especially in our area, are assigned to numerous schools. So they drive to different schools, but they usually have a home school. So that's what that was aiming at. Maybe I need to figure out a different phrase for that.
Yeah, homeschool, because I have a home.
But homeschool is a different thing too. All right, and I
So
think we're
about
getting close.
10 more seconds. Finish up that last question. Okay, I'm gonna, finals coming in. I feel like it's American Idol. I'm gonna end the poll and I'll share the results. Let's see. Oh, you can't. I don't know what's going on.
Interesting. Oh, that's all right. And thank you. Some of you put it in the chat too. Here, we can just stop on. Oh, there it is. Wait, now it's sharing again.
Oh, wait, we're all clicking the button.
Oh, that might be why. I'm like, wait, I tried to help just now and it did not work.
Oh, I see. I'm in Southwest Washington. I can't get to the poll results. Let me see.
That's okay. I think we'll be okay. Let's go ahead and move on if you are up to it.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Close that out. So then, as I mentioned before, we also talked a lot about, well, I'll show you on the next slide. We talked about a lot of things in our last webinar together. And so unless we need to stop and answer a clarifying question, we're probably not going to go into much depth on what we talked about last, because we want to go deeper into some of those specific issues today. But we thought at least we should activate some schema around what we talked about. So James, if you want to help us with this part, here are some of the things that we talked about in our last session. Let's see, are we there?
Yeah, so we talked about why arts education matters, and we got everybody's got their own kind of response to that. I think it's when we look at things like Champions of Change study that follows kids all the way up through their 30s now, we can see real data about why arts education matters. I mean, we've all got the kind of the heartfelt things about why it matters to us, and being able to express, it's easily a third of our population it's the way that the arts is how we engage with the universe. And that's a really emotional response, but we can see from things like from the data that arts matter because it helps our population in every aspect of society. I mean, the kids that have arts education are more likely to be engaged in every other subject area. They're more likely to graduate on time. They're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to graduate from college on time. They have higher overall incomes. They're more likely to run public office. They're more likely to vote. So they're just better citizens overall. So the arts matters in myriad ways, and not just in our personal ways, and why does equity in arts education matter? Well, the data also shows that arts education wipes out the achievement gap for race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. It wipes it out. So having equity in arts education is extremely important, especially when one considers that our poorer and students of color tend to perform most poorly on standardized state tests and things like that. And for that reason, they are the people who need the arts the most to close that achievement gap are the first ones who have their arts courses taken away from them, so that they can go and have remediation in tested subject areas. So it just doesn't make sense. So equity is extremely important. And how does the funding model impact equity? That's one that I'm not as conversant in.
That's okay though. The takeaway from it was exactly just what's here. It is really complicated and it's changing all the time. However, the other takeaway was we at least have to dig in a little. We have to acknowledge that in order to talk about advocating for the arts, money has to be a part of the conversation. Everything costs money. Everything takes labor hours to accomplish. And so money is going to be there waiting for us to talk about it. Even if we go in with all of these fantastic reasons about why the arts matter personally, professionally, to the economics of our state, it matters for a lot of reasons. The equity and the inequity, there's a lot to say about that. But as well prepared as we might be on all of those topics, at some point in our advocacy journey, somebody, probably more than just one, will ask us, but then how do you expect to handle the blank that we can't fund, or the blank that the money needs to go to as well, or the blank that's going to be that we're already investing money in, and how are we going to shift money from this to that? Like, those funding questions are going to be there. So we have to at least have a little understanding. And I've been adding some resources on that. And I know we've been having some conversations on how to better support our educators community in understanding of funding moving forward. So if that is something that we need to provide more training on in the future, or just more resources, we can certainly try to leverage some of that. So yeah, I won't.
Part of that too is that we have to always remember, because it's kind of a tactic that's done by administrators and politicians, is to put it back on us all the time.
Oh, sure.
Ability to find all the solutions to solve all the problems of, it's the education is like this, funding is like this giant pie, and there's all these slices of pie, and so how would you, what would you take away from the children in order to get your arts? That is not our responsibility to do that. It puts all of their work on us. So we're to work together. We're absolutely there for the solutions. But not to concede the point and allow those that actually have the power to put it all on us to figure it out.
Oh, that's so great. Yep. Thank you. Absolutely. All right. So there is the overview of the funding. And then the part that we are really going to dive into this more today. Last time around, we also talked about the RCW's Revised Code of Washington, or basically law. Once bills or initiatives get formalized and adopted into law, they become part of the RCWs in Washington. SB5878 is the one that we are specifically focusing on this year. That's the one for clarifying equitable requirements in arts education. And then we're also going to talk a little bit more today about State Board of Ed, or SBE, reporting, because we mentioned in the last one that the State Board of Ed collects an annual report from all school districts where they affirm to the state board what they have been implementing as is required in all of those other RCWs and laws. And as of this school year, it includes the arts. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well.
Can I ask a question, Miranda? Is
betcha.
that public record then? So can we look that up for our districts?
Yes, kind of. I'm going to get to that. Yes, and yes, and yes. I'll come back for sure. All right.
And Miranda, when you're talking about funding and stuff, when you kind of touched on that, you might be looping back around to it, but I just want to point you to the chat. There's a couple questions in the chat specific to funding. I don't know if you want to weave them in now, or if you want to just say, yes, yes, I'll cover that. I'll cover that. Just
I'll
to,
take a look.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. And James, would you mind giving us this overview of the key reminders of 5878? And I'll take a look at the chat while you are doing that one, because James is definitely the expert on these things.
Yeah, so the first and formal arts instruction, it does need to be arts for arts' sake only. So that means arts infused and arts integrated courses and curricula. They're all wonderful, but they are to be in addition to arts for arts' sake courses. So you're not just going to solve this, meet the requirements of this law by, doing some artsy projects in your science class and calling that art. So it does need to be instruction solely for the arts discipline that you're going for. Let's see. Every student has to have access to arts education. So there's two parts of the bill that address this. The first part is the overarching part that says all schools, 200 students or more, must have visual and performing arts. That "and" is very important. So they have to give instruction in visual and performing arts. It doesn't say they have to have art instructors for both. It says they have to give instruction in visual and performing arts. And then later on in the bill, it talks about, in the law rather, I'm calling it a bill, it's a law now. It says that every year there must be, students must receive instruction in at least one visual or one performing art. So, but they have to have it in their schools, so they can just choose. And this is one of the great things about this law, is that it leaves things open enough so that every district and school and community can tailor it to their resources and their needs. So it just gives the broad things of, you have to have this instruction. What that looks like, which of the arts, which visual arts and which performing arts you choose to have is up to you. But you have to have it in all schools. It has to be accessible to all students in a manner that is commensurate with instruction in other core subject areas. That's huge. So that means that no longer can you have your art class or your band class meet once a week or once every other week or once a month, and it can't be just a docent program. It has to be qualified instructors, and it has to be, if you have math 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, and your arts courses are going to be 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day. So that is commensurate. Commensurate means equal. And as far as the docent programs go, it's really, those are not qualified instructors. They're wonderful programs to have, but they are not commensurate with the other core disciplines. And the argument I always, because I tend to get a lot of like, well, we have an arts program. We have docents, and those of you that know me have probably heard me say this a million times. The answer I always have is, well, as long as the docent program is a complete program, and next year let's hire art teachers, and we'll have a math docent program that they come in once a month. So that usually shuts the argument down pretty quickly. And then the arts instructors of each school district as subject matter experts shall be consulted in related decisions at their school. So they're to be consulted in the law. It talks about to be consulted for course offerings and K-12 and scope and sequence, and with the intent of creating equity and vertical alignment and valid pathways, college and career pathways for students. So this one kind of snuck in there. Nobody really paid much attention to it, and so it didn't get any pushback at all. And I think it's one of the most powerful parts of the bill. And it allows, if we are organized within our districts. So I just sent out a request last night to my school board. We got together as a visual performing arts department district-wide and created recommendations for K-12 visual and performing arts at our district, and talked about the law and how each part of those recommendations fits with the law. And so requested that to be on the board agenda so that we can officially put those recommendations into the record so that the public hears them and and that's something that the district has to respond to. Because if they don't, I'll probably keep bringing it up because I tend not to go away. So I think that's something that I'm hoping that I can share out as a template for everybody. So if we're getting together, remember it's arts with an S. I mean, we're the WAEA right here, but this is very much an arts bill, not an visual art bill. This is for visual and performing arts. So and there is strength in numbers, and so we need to get this out to all the kids and be all on the same page and be working together. And if we do that, we are much more powerful, and it's very easy for a school board or a superintendent to hear one of us come in the room and just push us away and slough us off as kind of, you know, trying to save our job or feather our own bed or something like that.
Right.
But when you have, you know, the entire department coming in district-wide and talking to the community and laying it out there that this is for kids and for equity, and for kind of that rising tide lifting all boats, then that's much more difficult to ignore.
Yep. Yeah, that right there is going to be, excuse me, I hope one of the big takeaways for today, that level of collaborating and advocating together really makes a huge difference. And I skimmed through as many of those. Oh, sorry, what was that, James?
One of the key points of the bill that's not on here, and I know that, and I'll do it later, I can't remember, but I know that it's probably the part that has, in my experience, has had the most kind of fear or concern about from educators, part about qualifications.
Yep.
So, but that is something that's in there that has to be qualified personnel teaching, qualified in the specific arts discipline.
In that, yep.
And that has big implications to the elementary level, but I know at the secondary level, people are kind of worried about it too. But yep. I just couldn't get into it.
Yeah, we do. You got it. And actually what we're going to do here, folks, so we're going to look at what this bill in theory will look like in practice. And then we're going to take these same concepts of what it looks like in practice, and we're going to follow it up by saying, and here are some of the common challenges that we're already seeing with those practices or with those theoretical practices. Okay. So we will look at the ideal and then at the more practical concerns around it, and then segue into what you can do about each of those pieces, or about the conversation as a whole, what you can do overall. So action, tools, suggestions. So breaking it down, required offerings by grade level. This is in practice, in theory, what it should look like. In K-8, each student must receive instruction in at least one arts discipline throughout their K-8 experience. So for each year, the kids need some sort of art. In 9-12, the students have to be able to take it has to be offered. They have to be given the opportunity to take the arts at each academic year, but we know because of the different requirements, and even just the different way that different schools have their schedules arranged. Some of them have a 4-period day and they're on trimesters. Some of them have semesters, but they have 7 or 8 periods a day. Some of them have 0 hour, but then others don't have 0 hour options. So there's a lot of variation, especially in high school. So the students won't be taking art every single year, but the art has to be offered every year for all the students. There are technically 2 credits required before graduation. However, one of those 2 can also be waived if the student has a personalized pathway plan, saying that they already know what field they want to go into or what they want to study after high school. Then they can technically get the other requirement waived. The original one, not waivable for any reason. The second one, it says it's a requirement, but it's also a waivable requirement. So make of that what you will. Then the teacher cert.
The original bill did away with that waivable, but it was, you know, there's certain groups that pushed to have that amended out.
Yeah. The teacher certification requirements. So it says, this new law says arts instruction must be provided by either a certificated teacher with an endorsement in the relevant arts discipline, or a fully certificated teacher actively pursuing an endorsement in the relevant arts discipline. Even with that language, you'll see, we'll get into some possible concerns. I did want to go ahead and note right here, if you are interested in adding a certification, or if you know anyone in your school that's interested in adding that, test-based endorsements are available for dance, music, in all the different divisions of music, choral, general, and instrumental, in theater arts, and in visual arts. So, although side note, I do always find it interesting that visual arts are lumped in all at one. Maybe at some point in the future, it would be good for us to even look at trying to find different categories of visual arts in the same way that over time music has evolved into breaking out different categories. I, for one, am endorsed in K-12 music, which I have a specific emphasis in choral. I'm certified technically to teach general and instrumental, but you would not want me teaching your band. I should not be teaching band. That's not my strong suit. But when I started teaching dance as a performing art class at a high school here, I had to take that endorsement test in order to add dance as a certification or an endorsement on my certificate. So the tests are accessible through OSPI's website. I included the link, so if you download this after today, it'll take you right there. You can look at what is required to take and pass the tests. Also, in terms of financial cost for it, the WEA retired group has scholarships available for teachers pursuing additional endorsements. And I clarified with them, this could count, but they already closed their scholarship application for the 24 year. So you'll need to wait and check with their website to see when their 2025 scholarships open. But if you or anybody you know are interested in adding endorsements, well, those are maybe some things that could help you.
I would say check with your local union as well.
Yeah.
I know mine has as part of the CBA, works with the district to provide professional enhancement grants. So you can apply for them and you can use them for things like national boards or,
that's awesome.
Any professional enhancement. So that could be something that, and if you don't have that in your district, talk to your union about putting that in the next bargain.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then talking about the State Board of Education compliance report. Okay, so in the law, it says, starting in the 23-24 school year, the arts education requirements were included in the state board's annual basic education compliance report. The report was published in February, so it is publicly available. We also have made a page on our website. So if you go to our ArtsEd Washington website, there is an entire page of frequently asked questions about equity in arts education and about mostly 5878. And so you can go on there, you can see the final bill report, you can see OSPI's newsletters that they published at different times about rolling out 5878. I uploaded the SBE's compliance report from this year. So you can access all of those pieces on our webpage, or you could also go to the SBE's website and find that same compliance report. You will find that it's aggregated. So it's an overall, here's the overall percentage, and I'm going to come back to that in a few slides. There is also a question of and versus or that I do think has impacted the way that people have answered on the report. And has impacted our conversations. And I've even seen it now pop up in a couple of the questions in our chat. In some sections of the bill and of the law itself, it says visual and performing arts. Common schools will teach, reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, visual and performing arts. And it says and in several other places too, but it also says starting in the 23-24 school year, students shall receive instruction in at least one performing art or visual art. So it's that or that's in play right now. I've been emailing with some folks at the State Board of Education to get clarification on that. I have a meeting coming up week after next. Right now, based on our most recent email conversation, I've seen they said that and is required. They do expect all schools to have both. It sounds like the 23-24 or option is meant as more of a stepping stone to get there. But I don't know what else to make of the progress that's expected to get there, because all we see in the bill is as of 23-24, the or is required. And so that will be the main focus of what I talk with them about in a couple weeks, is what next? Because if schools are currently meeting the requirement, maybe some schools didn't meet the requirement at all, and maybe they've added one. And so now they're meeting the current requirement, and that's great. And I'm so glad that they're making that progress. But I don't want them to stop. I don't want them to say, oh, we now have music, done. Or we now have visual art, done. We met the requirement, check. If we're expecting them to eventually add the other, I want to make sure that I'm really clear on understanding that requirement, and that we as an entire field are really clear on being able to advocate for that requirement correctly. So I will hopefully know more in a few weeks. Okay, you've already seen some of the challenges kind of weave themselves in, even though we said we were going to try to address them later. Some of it's almost impossible to talk about without acknowledging the challenges, but now we're going to really dive in. Okay, offerings, challenges by grade level. So we said in K-8, students have to experience arts education throughout. There are going to be most likely different challenges in a traditional elementary versus in a traditional middle school. So we've kind of broken these out. And some of these were developed in collaboration with the WMEA, actually, who's done quite a bit of research about what it looks like in schools that they have access to data, like more specific data on. So scheduling and staffing seems to be the most common challenge for elementary. Districts have varying prep period requirements. Often the arts are covering the prep periods. There are a lot of different subjects to juggle, and there are varying minutes offered in each subject. So the only subject at this point in Washington that is an exact requirement is PE. PE has to happen for 100 minutes in elementary. But that doesn't mean that we're now going to be teaching music or visual art or dance or theater for 100 minutes. And it doesn't mean that they're getting 100 minutes of math either. So now we have to look at, okay, well, how many minutes are they getting a week of math? But then are they getting that same number of minutes in social studies? Because chances are no. So it's possible that in some of your schools, you might be looking at maybe making your art classes commensurate with their reading subject, but maybe your kids have a double dose of math. Or it might be commensurate with their science, but it might not be commensurate with their reading. So there's still a lot of variability in there. For the most part, I am just really encouraging you to have the conversations to start getting commensurate with at least something. Something is better than nothing. But that is going to look really different at all of your different schools. In the middle schools, which are most often 6-8 at this point, for every student to meet the requirement, we're finding that typically more seats are needed. A lot of middle schools don't have nearly the arts offerings that the high schools do. So you're literally adding brand new classes. And unlike elementary, where typically a single teacher teaches the majority of the subjects for the kids, in 6-8, chances are you're having to build in an extra period into the schedule rotation, right? Like you're having to take out a subject from that time of day and put another subject in, or add, yeah, probably for budgeting reasons, that's what would happen. Anyway, otherwise it'd be just spending more money during that same hour of the day, and that's not quite as likely. So we're probably going to see impacts like overall FTE and staffing. It's probably going to lead to more reduction of non-arts teachers, which is unfortunately likely to cause an us versus them set of defensive responses, which is not what we're trying to go for. But it is a possible consequence of this, and sorry, but so be it. Like, the kids need arts, and we don't want to take away from anyone's job, but it probably is going to have to happen. So James, thought on that?
To remember when that comes up, that this is not us, the arts people, horning in there. This is correcting an existing inequity. It's clarifying what's supposed to be there anyway. Arts has been core and basic education in the state and in this country for over 2 decades. Since No Child Left Behind made it, core and basic, and it's been core and basic here at least since 2195, back in like 2004. So this is not, again, that's that whole kind of like, well, what would you take away from kids? No, this is
right.
It's been here all along, and so what you need to take away, administrators or whatever, is maybe some of those things that aren't actually core and basic. So the electives that are your pet projects or whatever, and not put us against each other as colleagues. And it's important for us to remember to communicate with our non-arts colleagues, and that's why it's important too to be in communication with the WEA, who supports arts education as part of its goals, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because when we put new business items in about the arts and supporting arts education, they pass unanimously.
That was said perfectly. I'm not even going to try to recap that. Thank you. Other issues that are likely in middle school: possible reduction or cutting of non-required courses, which, like we said, could have that impact on other electives. We also are seeing sometimes teachers instructing out of their area of expertise, even with the correct endorsement. So like I mentioned a moment ago, I technically could teach band. I should not. If you're in a pinch, you might see that an administrator says, well, you technically have a visual art degree, and we have this, I don't know, pottery wheel over here, so you should go teach pottery. And if you're like, I don't know how to do that, they're like, well, we need you to do it because we can't spend money on whatever else. That does get tricky. I have no magic solution for that. Work with your union, work with your administrators, but we are seeing that that's a potential challenge. We are also seeing classes with more than 32 students. To reach the requirement without adding courses is just taking kids and trying to cram them in so that we don't impact the bottom line budget of FTE. And some art classes can handle that and some can't. So that's definitely something to talk with your administrators about. And then, of course, facility issues, especially when you're talking performing arts. If you're looking at theater or dance, that can really be a struggle in terms of where do we put people where they have room to move. And then I don't know why the last half of my sentence disappeared under high school, but I swear there was supposed to be a second half of that sentence. In grades 9 to 12, we are seeing fewer challenges likely, and that's just because the graduation requirements were pre-existing. So a lot of staffing was already kind of factored in for this before this law. And so we haven't seen quite the same number of massive shifts in high school, but I would say it's possible that any of those in the elementary or middle school could find their way into your high school experience as you're trying to make some of these changes. In that case, I would also just say consider the same advice that we've been giving for any of those items above, because they're going to apply to you and hopefully be able to help you with that. Common challenges in terms of the teacher certifications. So one, we're already seeing there's a current teacher shortage in Washington and pretty much everywhere. And that includes in the arts. Two, like we mentioned before, districts have differing requirements, but in this case, it's about substitutes and emergency certifications. In some of your districts, you might be able to just step in and start teaching. In others, there might be a lot more that has to go on before you get cleared to teach or to teach a particular subject. In some districts, professional artists might be eligible to already start teaching, especially in media arts, because of how media arts often overlap with CTE, career and technical education. But that's still going to differ. So we can't always have a hard, fast answer for that type of an issue. You're going to have to really dig in and figure out what it is in your district. Number three, oh, go ahead.
That would probably fall into the actively pursuing.
That part should be consistent.
So, yeah.
Yep, that part should be consistent.
For professional artists, especially, like if they're coming in there with CTE, those are like emergency searches that come in. So, yeah.
Yeah, good call. Thank you. Number three, statewide variation in school access to arts teachers, as well as to performance or rehearsal spaces. And of course, student interest, that's going to vary by school. But think again about like our rural schools, especially if you are 2 hours away from any sort of a medium-sized city, even if your school wants to add another art form, do you have anyone in your 5,000 person town that has the background or the interest in teaching that? And if you don't, when are you going to be able to recruit and hire someone and get them to move into your town or convince them to drive 2 hours each way to your school to teach those classes? I mean, we have very different issues all around the state. So that variation is something to keep in mind. And then our K-8 endorsement is also another consideration that we're talking a lot about in these conversations, because technically, according to PESB, the Professional Educator Standards Board, that oversees like the licensure of teachers, K-8 teachers do have authority to teach basically everything except PE. But then again, this law says you have to have the endorsement in the field of expertise. So I definitely see the conversation, the validity in the conversation of an administrator or another person saying, well, they're a K-8 teacher, so technically they can teach art. I get where that's coming from. That's not really the intent of what this law is saying. And furthermore, I would really encourage you to ask, is requiring this, let's just pick a random pretend hypothetical elementary teacher. If we ask them to add an additional prep that they've never taught before, they might not even feel confident in teaching. We're going to ask them to add that preparation, teach those lessons, figure out how to differentiate, figure out how to maintain all the students' IEPs or 504 requirements within that discipline that they're not familiar with, probably give up the prep period that they would be otherwise sending the kids to an art specialist for, and then ask them to grade and maintain the records for that new subject. Is that really what's best for our teacher? And is that really what's best for the kids? And typically, I would say probably not.
Well, so this is where what we were talking about before, where the contract, the CBAs for each district are going to be in our favor, because to add
hopefully that'll
another course in, which has to be commensurate with, you're going to be taking away planning time, which is usually bargained planning time. So you're going to run into real issues there. And I think that's where we need to be vocal with our unions to, protect our general elementary teachers and let them know that we've got their back, that we're not in this to make more work for them. We're
Right.
in this to make education better for kids.
Yep. And honestly, those elementary teachers have so many subjects that they have to prep and teach and grade anyway. If you have an elementary teacher that loves it and that wants to do it, then great. This gives them the option and they can work on adding that specific endorsement. And I love that for them. But unless you really have somebody with the passion and the skill set and the and the CBA to allow it, I would really hesitate to force it on elementary teachers because they already have a lot on their plate as it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's any district out there that has it in their contract that they can force a super contract on anybody. So,
Yep. So those prep period hours, that's hopefully going to really be helpful. I think someone mentioned that in the comments as well.
Sure.
Okay, last of the challenges before we get to the reflections and the goal setting. Okay, so State Board of Education, first of all, take a look at it. Study and understand not only the arts part, but how the arts requirements fit with the other school requirements. Because kind of like what I was just saying about elementary teachers, your administrators have a lot that they have to maintain in a school year. If it was only make these changes for the arts, I think some of our administrators would be a lot quicker to make those changes. But because of all of the complex dominoes that are happening everywhere and all of the changes that our administrators have to stay current on, this is one small piece of a very big, challenging puzzle. So the more that we understand that, the better we can anticipate the concerns of our administrators and hopefully help move past those concerns. 2, then look into the arts details. Here's what you will find for this year. On the state board report, it says that 87.1% of elementary and middle schools reported as meeting compliance. It says that 93.2% of high schools reported meeting compliance. Now, I would not make a direct comparison with the survey that we sent out simply because this is each elementary, middle, or high school got one yay or nay. In our survey, we might have had 5 people from the same school. So that yay or nay was disproportionate, right? However, I will still say our numbers were nowhere this high. They were higher than I originally thought they would be. So that was still encouraging, but they were not nearly this high. And in my collaborations with a pretty decent handful of arts administrators or curriculum administrators from across the state, quite a few of them have also shared, that's really strange. Maybe they didn't include my district in that because we're not meeting compliance in middle school yet. Or, oh yeah, we're not meeting it in middle school, but we're almost there in art. And so they're working on it. They know, but they're also curious about why are these numbers so high? And so that is something that I've tried asking for the state board is how do administrators or educators or even just community members access their own school's report to see did their school district report being in compliance? Because for all of those reasons that we just went through in our presentation here today, I think there are plenty of chances for people to misinterpret, to forget, for something to slip through the cracks. And sure, maybe a couple people here and there are just willingly saying yes when they know they're not. But I don't think that genuinely most people are being deceptive on purpose. I think it's just there's a lot and it's possible that they think they're meeting requirements and maybe they're not. And if they engage with you as the content experts, they might understand more about it. And maybe they would change their answer. But thus far, oh, go ahead.
I think that and versus or argument is
yep,
really
that's a big one.
Culprit in most of that because
yep.
I know so many instructors that have talked to their administrators and they say, no, we're meeting it because we have music because it says or.
Right.
That's the information from OSBI.
Yeah.
Or no, it's or we don't never mind that and. So
yeah.
I think it's trying to assume best intentions, you know.
Right.
I think it's a genuine mistake in the majority of cases.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm gathering as well. And so that will be, rest assured, that'll be one of my main questions when I get to meet with them in, I think, like a week and a half, is if the or qualifies for this year, then is there a plan to have to report on an and scenario in what, next year, the year after, where we go from here? But for you to be able to look into those arts details and then look at your own school or your own district and see how that might fit, I think that would help you feel really informed. And then number 3, well, that was kind of where I was going. Consider how your school might have responded. Maybe ask your own administrators for more details. I have heard from several people at the state board in my conversations with them that it might be good to just hear from the educators, hear from the administrators. If you all want to know these things, that's their info email address on the screen that they sent me to share. And it's an interesting dichotomy, I realize, going way back to the beginning where we were talking about your voice matters. I know sometimes, as James mentioned, sometimes people think, oh, well, you're just trying to protect your own job. And so it feels like that means your voice doesn't matter. So I'm out here trying to gather insight from all the different arts organizations, the different districts as best I can, and say, here's what I'm finding collectively. But if in those cases, my voice isn't the best one because I'm not the educator, well, then in that case, I pass it back to you. You are the educators. Go ask the people. So, you know, maybe as we and you all are having these conversations with people, maybe it'll start really elevating their understanding of how important it is to many, many of us. Okay, I want to pause. I think some of you have already been adding some of these things in the chat. But have you observed these challenges? Do you have any other insights or questions thus far? I want to ask you, put them in the chat if you haven't already. I'm going to give me and James a moment to skim through what's in writing there and give you a moment to add anything else.
But I just want to fire off my questions to you. Just kidding.
One other option that might be worth pursuing after this conversation, my understanding is that the state board has the legal authority to create rules, which is, you know, it's kind of a subset of a law, essentially. Rules that interpret how the law needs to be upheld. So if this is part of, if this is still something that is really unclear and, as Gail mentioned, is really important, that needs to be consistent across the state, perhaps that's something that we need to propose to the state board as a rule for them to explore and clarify on their own. Because yeah, I definitely don't want this type of confusion, and honestly, this type of frustration. It causes frustration for everybody involved. I personally, I really appreciated everything I've seen, as Gail mentioned, from the rollout plan from Seattle Public Schools. I mean, they have been thorough and thoughtful, and these changes can't happen overnight. So the way that they're rolling out is really intentional and seems to me, from what I've seen, like it's going to really set them up for long-term success. But how disheartening would it be if it turned out that one key component of their rollout suddenly later was confirmed to be inaccurate, especially after all of that time and money inevitably invested in a lawyer. So I definitely think this is showing how much urgency there is around this topic, and I really hope that the state board will receive this as a request that also needs clarification. I'm not personally at liberty to make that call, but I would really like to be able to have that conversation with them and utilize whatever information I can gather from especially James and Gail on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that the title of this law was that it was a clarification of the rules around arts education. So yeah, and that's why the language was chosen, like commensurate and words like that, specifically to unmushify the legal language around arts education, which is just,
Yeah.
really rough for years and years. And so what we have here now is, excuse me, a deliberate attempt, kind of backdoor through rulemaking, to change the legislation, to re-mushify the laws, to give people wiggle room to, deny kids what the law says.
Well, and hopefully we won't let anybody re-mushify it. I'm gonna try to be really assertive and optimistic both with that. And going back again to my example of what I said before with my own personal experience shifting from a 6-period to a 4-period day when I was in high school. The hard part for me was it meant I actually had less room in my schedule for art, because previously I could have done 1 term of this art and two classes of another art in the second semester, or vice versa. And with a 4-period day, I only got the 1 period in each quarter. But it did technically count as an entire, I had 1 semester of math. That's it. In that 1 year, I had 1 semester of English. That's it, because it was the contact hours and meeting the standards for the entire year. So in that sense, my 1 semester of choir counted as an entire semester of choir. So I can really see that might be an option, but then I also would want to make sure that it's clearly articulated enough that somebody wouldn't misinterpret what that might mean in their particular schedule and setup either, so as to use it to wiggle out of something. So yeah, definitely something I'll be adding to my conversation. Thank you. I don't know that gives you any answers, but it definitely clarifies why some of this is challenging and where we have to continue to have that conversation and fix it. Also, a real quick touch on the question, Senate bill versus law terminology. Somebody in the chat was messaging saying that's a little bit confusing still, totally understandable. I think the thing is, for anybody who's joining the conversation right, now in 2024, you'll all know it as a law. This is part of the law that talks about equitable arts education. For anybody that is looking at the history of how we got here, or anybody that was a part of the conversation earlier, they refer to it by the number probably of the bill that was moving its way through legislature. So technically it is a law, but it's like a nickname kind of. So yeah, if that helps. We are really
well, then we just need to make sure that we stop using that and make sure it's really clear for everybody. Already a law, and that this law has these requirements, and the OSPI is trying to use its power to rewrite it with this or thing. So what did it say? Like, this was what their new addendum, this is what they wrote, right? It's or, and that's what the OSPI is putting out. But according to the law, it's commiserate and. Is that correct? Is that my base level recap?
It's both.
Yeah.
OSPI is going to only focus on the part that says or, and not mentioning the and, which is actually the overarching. So the law says that all schools shall give instruction in visual and performing arts. So that's the main overarching thing. Every school has to have instruction, give instruction in both. So, and then later on in the law, it says for elementary schools, every elementary school is required to give students instruction in at least one, and it says at least, it doesn't say only, you can only do it at least.
Okay, but that gives them the wiggle room to put out their guideline, which you said they have the legal authority to create rules that can be interpreted on how the rule is going to be implemented, or how the law is going to be implemented. So that's how they're wiggling around it.
But they can't okay. Zero out a section of the law and say that's no longer required, right? Yeah. Because the first part of the RCW rather, of what is required is shall give instruction in both.
Okay, all right. I just thank you. That's
cool.
I need a summary.
And really, folks, there's a reason why there's an entire professional field for lawyers, and why lawyers have very specific fields of expertise as well. This is tricky stuff. So I think it makes sense that as we're seeing how the complexities of this law are playing out in our schools, I think it makes sense that we probably do need to dig in and look a little bit more at the actual statutory language and see what is the most official interpretation according to the state board. Yep. We're pretty much out of time. I will still fly through and show you the advocacy ideas. Oh, James, did you have a hand up?
I just wanted to say, because I'm seeing in the chat here a couple of times about accountability, and I wanted to make sure that we go over the new law, 1239, HB 1239.
Oh,
that was
yep.
Office of the Ombuds.
Yes. So two things. One, in terms of accountability, when schools submit their compliance report, the state board then produces a list of the schools that are recommended for accreditation as a school, and the schools that are on like a remediation list or a need support list. And then there's a whole program from the state board of what they do to support the schools that have not met the requirements that are necessary. So that is one level of accountability. Now, if a school is meeting all of their requirements and not the arts, that isn't going to be enough to remove them from accreditation. And honestly, that wouldn't seem fair. I think if that was just the one thing that they were still working on. But if there are several other things, or for many, many years, the school is continuing to be deficient in one or more of their most important requirements, then the state board will put them on this additional program and work with them and literally do training, leadership development, funding development, like all sorts of things that are required of them to get back on in the good graces, basically, as a fully accredited school. So that is one level. The second level that James just brought up is there's about to be a new way for educators and private public community members, a new way for educators, employees, administrators, and community members to file their concerns with the state. And that is going to be going through the Office of Education Ombuds. So instead of sending a concerned question to OSBI or a concerned question to PESB or a concerned question to SBE, you will send your concerned question straight to the Office of Education Ombuds. They're working on a form, a process of how to process those. And then they will either step in and support and mediate, as is their traditional method of operation as ombuds, or they will delegate your particular concern or question to the appropriate decision-making body, which, depending on what you've asked about, if it's a concern of meeting school requirements, if it's mismanagement of money, if it's an issue with someone handling of an IEP, if it's a code of ethics violation from an employee, depending on what the concern is that you've lodged, they will either mediate or delegate to whichever authority needs to be contacted. And then they will be the ones holding the data for what types of concerns are being filed throughout the state as well. So that is going to become a new practice very soon. It's still in the works as of right now.
And but that will, when it comes on, just always thinking ahead to, worst case scenario, if there ever does have to be, legal action taken, anything like that, complaints that are lodged through something like this will be part of the record to show that, attempts were made all along the way to solve things in the kindest way possible, and that agencies were aware that this was a problem and chose not to, or at what level they chose to address it.
I think I'm really going to appreciate the idea of it going through the ombuds, because they're the least, they're a low risk. They're trying to come in and find ways that everybody can win in the conversations, rather than it feeling like immediately jumping to a punitive report. All right.
So I just want to jump in here real quick. Just a little light bulb in a question that I was answering to Katie. we were talking about contracts and union contracts and getting some of this in union contracts, but a union can grieve a district if they're not following state law. So it doesn't have to be in your contract. If you are not following the law, your union or you as an individual can grieve the district for not following the law. And it's just a grievance process that will start rolling. So maybe that's something we can talk about moving forward.
Yeah.
That just hit me because it's the law. Doesn't matter if it's in your contract or not.
And if your union,
It's a really good point.
Union, and they refuse to grieve it, you can grieve your union to WEA.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, you don't need your union to. Yeah, you've got there's a big union that can grieve it. And we can continue this conversation. I want to respect everybody's time. It is 11:38. The clock hour link is in the chat, and we thank you for coming from the WAEA. We will be sharing this information with you. I'll be sharing contact information for Miranda and James as well. If you have follow-up questions or you didn't feel like your chat question got answered fully, this is a great conversation. This is a great place to be. We appreciate all the voices in the room. And thank you for spending your Saturday with us. We will see you next month, if not sooner, with something else. Please stay on if you have any questions about WAEA or further questions and clarification. But thank you very much to Miranda and James, and everybody. It's nice to see you. Have a wonderful day. And back to you, Miranda, to close up.
No worries. I was just going to say all of these other things are going to be in the downloadable file. So yeah. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.